Look, innovation is very, very important because human society and economies have relied on innovation for growth. But there's a guy called Robert Gordon at Northwestern University who did some pioneering work on innovation, and he split innovation into three industrial revolutions. The first one was things like steam and coal and things like railways. The second one, which he considers to be the most important, was electricity, the internal combustion engine, petroleum and rearranging hydrocarbons to provide fuel. It was entertainment and communications devices like telephones and telegraphs, and also basic sanitation like, flushing toilets, sewerage systems, flowing water, which is very, very important. The last one is computing. Now, what he found was that the second one, which is the one built around things like internal combustion engines, which was in the 1820s onwards, had the biggest impact. And the computing revolution from 1960s onward has had nowhere nearly that impact. I'll come back to that, but let me just back up a stage. An interesting way to understand innovation is to take somebody from 2015 and propel him, say, back to 1970 or 1965, say 50 years. Now, they would actually go back to that environment if we had a Back to the Future model, and they would actually understand how people live, because things haven't actually changed that much. I mean, we might have different looking phones, we might have different looking refrigerators, we might have different cars, but the basic structure and the things we have are similar. Now, if that person was then taken back another 100 years to 1865, they would have absolutely no idea of how life operated. And to give you an idea of a simple thing, life expectancy in the middle 1800s would have been like 40 to 50 years. We now, of course, as a matter of routine, accept it's going to be certainly above 75 and increasingly above 85. So all of that has changed dramatically. But let's now come back to the one that's really important to us, is computing. Robert Solow, an economist, once said that you can see the effects of computers on everything other than productivity. And the actually interesting point is why. I think between 1960 and 1990, when the initial phase of computing went through, and particularly in the early 1990s when the connectivity issues like the internet took off, I think that's where you got most of the benefit. Since that time, what has actually happened in technology is actually important to understand. What it's done is improved speed, miniaturized things, taken existing processes and arguably made it better. But it's not the incremental change that people believe it is. And the other interesting thing about that is to actually look at the actual innovation or technology industry. Because fundamentally, one of the real reasons that you're not going to get the impact is what that industry has become. Let's take a very, very popular product, a smartphone. Everybody looks at their smartphones and now looks around and says, well, how could I have lived without it? The reality is you actually had every bit of the functionality that the iPhone had. It was just split across a whole bunch of devices. So what the iPhone or smartphones does is cannibalize. And it cannibalizes mobile telephony, it cannibalizes things like personal digital assistants, portable music players, even things like cameras. So when you look at the additional incremental revenue that is being generated, the correct way to do it would be to take smartphone revenues and then deduct all the things that it's killed off, rather than say, well, this is a brand new industry, because it's actually not. Then there's a second part of the innovation industry, is it's fundamentally changed. And as you know, Professor Christensen at Harvard has this wonderful, very catchy title called disruptive innovation. Now, most people use the word disruptive without actually having ever read his work, which is also quite amusing. What his basic thesis is interesting. His basic thesis is that this stuff is not actually better. It's in fact actually worse, but it's cheap. So what you do is you create these products and you effectively then try and snipe at incumbents in the industry. And you might make that innovation work because other people who can't afford the major product will take over your cheaper product. But the basic evidence everywhere is what actually the game here isn't about a new industry, creating an entirely new industry. It's about sniping at an incumbent like a fly buzzing around an elephant until basically the elephant decides I've had enough and pays you off to go away by buying you or whatever. So the model actually is not about creating vast new industries which provide great wealth in terms of employment and entire new functionality. It's about essentially a very destructive It's not disruptive in my view, it's actually a very destructive process, because what it does is it doesn't create wealth, but it destroys the income levels of the incumbents. And that's the game. And this is what actually venture capitalists like and fund. And if you look at the venture capital industry now, it's very destructive in this process, because they're going to fund these things not because it's going to become like American telegraph and telephones, a vast industry with an entirely new, almost ecosystem around it. What they want is something quick, which they can monetize quickly by selling to somebody else or IPOing. And obviously investors out there are very, very keen on growth, because they can't get growth, can't get additional sort of revenue streams elsewhere. And so they're basically playing like a lottery game of buying this stuff, hoping that one of them works. And the destructiveness is actually further ingrained. And I'll give you a classic example. It's Google. If you actually look at Google, Google probably partly funded by public money, because the original algorithm was funded by the US government and military to some degree, they essentially won the lottery. Now what they're now doing with the winnings of their lottery is, because they don't really know what to do with this, and they're desperate to find some other thing which will keep them at the forefront of investors' minds. So they're now basically going and buying other lottery tickets, one by one. Now this is an absurd business model. Rather than returning the money that they're making and becoming a cash cow, they're now basically taking the assumption that I won the lottery once, so I can win it again, and then I can win it again, forgetting that the first was a 1 in 10 million chance, or 1 in 100 million chance, and the chance of repeating that is negligible. So these modeling issues are very important. So for instance, all the businesses I see in the technology space, or many of the businesses I see in the technology space, are really not about long-term innovation, long-term improvements, long-term revenue streams. They're about these dynamics, and often they're quite interesting to watch, because I looked at them and I actually classified them one day. About 70 or 80% of them are essentially building a platform with clients. And basically what they then want to do is monetize the client by selling the information about the clients, either with the knowledge of the clients or sometimes by stealth, and basically marketing to them. So effectively what this is almost like an accruitment which sits around the consumption industry, and at the same time it goes back to the point about cannibalization. It's ripping the heart out of traditional advertising industries, but the overall revenue pie is coming down. I'll give you an example. To get 1,000 views in, say, something like television would have cost you $50. By the time you get to basically mobile phone, it's like $1 for 1,000. By the time you get to basically other portable devices, it's like a few pennies to get the same access. So you're destroying the revenue base. And this is why I'm fundamentally very, very concerned that what people mistake as innovation is actually not really innovation at all. It's a very destructive process that's going on. And this is why I always joke that Instagram is never going to take over from the internal combustion engine. Facebook is not nuclear fission. And whatever you think about Google, Google is not the Gutenberg press. And effectively, that doesn't mean that innovation isn't important. It's just that we're looking in the wrong places. Because if we could focus on things like improving crop yields, better use of water, better conservation of water, getting renewable energy and particularly storage of energy sorted out, getting the grids to work better, getting just simple logistics of moving things from one point to the other. 40% of food, 30 to 40% of food is lost in transit. It's just wasted. And so if we could improve that, that would be a real benefit. What we're playing around with is electronic gadgetry and basically marketing tricks, which I don't believe have the long-term benefit to the global economy that we need.